Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and I'm back with a third video in my Editorial Dude series. So today I would like to talk about a topic that is near and dear to the hearts of all grammar geeks, and that is punctuation. So you may think, well, what is there to say about punctuation? Right? There are the rules, you follow the rules, and everybody is happy. But I think there's more to it than that. You can look at punctuation as sort of elements of correctness, of what needs to be done in most cases for your writing to be technically or mechanically correct. But you can also think of the pieces of punctuation as having sort of uber functions that tie into your style, right, and the way you present yourself and what makes your own writing unique and what your readers perceive as they're reading and, we hope, enjoying your work. So I've come up with 10 pieces of punctuation I'd like to talk about. Since these videos I find probably go on too long, I'm going to try to get through all 10 of them, but I may only get through 5 on this one, and then I'll do the second 5 on a second video, which will help me fulfill my allotment of videos that I want to finish. So, that's good. It's like padding a research paper in college to get to the required page count. So let's talk about punctuation. And I have my usual high-tech visual aids, and I also have some new types of visual aids because I realize it's probably quite boring to just watch me on the screen all the time without having some other fun and interesting things to look at. So I'll have some additional visual aids. So let's start with number 1 in terms of punctuation, and that is this crafty little character known as the semicolon. So here's what I think about semicolons. You either know what they are and what they do, or you do not. I think the average American, the average person who doesn't do a lot of writing, doesn't know what a semicolon is, sees it and thinks, that's a typo. It's neither a colon nor a comma. It looks kind of squashed up. And what am I meant to do with this odd thing? The other part of our population knows what a semicolon is and does. And it has, several functions, as do most of the pieces of punctuation. But for now, I want to talk about what I see as its main function, which is to connect two independent clauses, two clauses that can stand alone as their own sentences, and not be perceived as sentence fragments. So the thing about people who know how to use semicolons is they like to use them. They see them as a part of their arsenal of being a good writer. And when they are used well and correctly, they help make subtle, I think, connections between the two halves, between what comes before and what comes after the semicolon. And so they can be a very sophisticated punctuation type when used well. But here's the thing. I think you've got to use them sparingly. Part of what you have to worry about as you're writing is information load on your readers, and to a certain extent, reading speed. I mean, there are many different speeds of reading. Some people read quite slowly, some read very quickly. There's no one right or wrong way to read or correct speed. But longer sentences impose a heavier cognitive load on the reader, And so it will slow them down, and you have to ask yourself, do I want my reader slowing down here? Is this a good place for me to sort of slam on the brakes a little bit, force my readers to think about the connections between the two sides of the semicolon? And if that is what you seek to accomplish, that is great. But in many cases, it will be easier on the reader, easier to read in general, if you split your sentence with a semicolon into two separate sentences. Now, there's a whole method of writing called sentence combining, to give variety to your sentences so you don't have just one simple sentence after another like Hemingway, who was the master of that, but to provide more variety in your writing, which is quite important. So my advice and what I look for while I'm editing is to make sure that the semicolon really works in its place, and when it doesn't, to split the sentence into two. So I said in a previous video I don't want to call out specific writers or books by names that are negative examples of things. And this, I don't mean this negatively, I just mean it as an example. So there is a mystery novelist published in the 50s, Nedra Tyer, and here's where the visual aids that I promise will come in. She has this book called Journey to Nowhere. I realize it's probably backwards on your screen. I apologize. I don't know how to fix it so that it won't be. Nedra Tyer loves semicolons. Oh, does she love her semicolons? I mean, they are, it is like a semicolon bomb went off in this book, and it sprinkled its shrapnel onto every page. There's one paragraph in this book in which I counted 23 semicolons. That has to be a record, at least in my life. They're part of her style. Okay, this was the way she wrote, and she's a good writer. This is a good book. It's not what we expect from the mystery genre today, but I really enjoyed this book. And once I realized that Nedra was going to pepper me with semicolons liberally, I went with it, and I enjoyed it because it was part of her style. But for all others, I just say, or I recommend, think about your semicolon usage and its effect on the reader, its effect on the pace of your writing, and whether you're using semicolons just because you can or because they are the best way to craft that particular sentence. I'll take a little bit of a side step here just to say that I do love these old book jackets. I mean, today's book jackets are very, I find, sharp and crisp with intriguing central images and something that grabs the eye. I think they overuse Helvetica, or one of the various Helvetica fonts massively. So this isn't to say that the book jackets of yesteryear are better than they are today. They're just different. And so I love this. I wanted to show you some other older book jackets of books that I've really enjoyed that have, I just think, great cover art. Here's one by a favorite a suspense novelist, very, very big in the 50s and 60s, Charlotte Armstrong, who wrote wonderful, unexpected books that were quirky and filled with interesting characters and ticking time bomb plots. She was excellent. I really enjoyed The Gift Shop. I recommend that if you like a good, fun caper. I just think this is a combination of two of her novellas in one book. It's called Duo. And I just love the cover design. It's simple. It's sort of mod and psychedelic in its own way. And, I just love to have this book on my bookshelf. It faces out because I like to look at it. Another great piece of art, I hope you can see this well, is Death by Inches by Del Shannon, who is famous for her Lieutenant Louise Mendoza mysteries set in the LA Police Department. And that should be a little bit better. I hope there's not the glare. But what a great piece of art. What great typography, what great colors. I mean, book jackets are works of art. There's no question about it. And I do have to do one of these videos sometime just about book jackets, because I don't think there should be a wing of the Metropolitan Museum devoted to book jackets, because they are an amazing art form unlike any other. So I would ask, whenever you read a hardcover book or a paperback, just look at the back flap, look at the back cover where the artist and the jacket designer will be credited, and just say a silent thank you to the designer, because they're such talented people. And I've worked with many in my career, and the right jacket for a book just takes it over the top, in my opinion. All right, so enough of that sideline. Let's get back to the real topic here of punctuation. So punctuation number 2 that I would like to discuss is the exclamation point. I don't know if you could see it that well, can you? Didn't print out very dark. Okay, time for a new printer. So we all know what the exclamation point does. Emphasis, exclamation. This is a piece of punctuation that needs to be used very, very sparingly. When you use too many of them, you sound quasi-hysterical, or like a person running around like a chicken with its head cut off. Too many semicolons, particularly when you have, say, 10 exclamation points in a row at the end of a sentence, lowers your credibility. People think, wow, this person really is highly, highly excitable, and I'm not sure that I agree that this sentence is worthy of 10 exclamation points. Let's agree. A sentence should end with one piece of punctuation, and only one. I think back to some what I consider effective uses of the exclamation point. And I'm thinking back to a book I read probably when I was a teenager, or maybe in my early 20s, Clive Cussler's book, Raise the Titanic. And it was raise the Titanic, right, with that exclamation point. And when I was younger, that title with that exclamation point conveyed such a sense to me of adventure, right? We're going to go out there with Dirk Pitt and we are going to raise the Titanic. And so I was thinking, as I was thinking about what I was going to pontificate about on this video, if I were the editor of that book now, would I suggest to Clive, let's not put the exclamation point in there. That's not necessary. But I think it works. I like the use of the exclamation point there. It signals something about the content of that book and what the reading experience will be. If every novel title ended with an exclamation point, it wouldn't be a good thing. I mean, think about, let me just think of some titles off the top of my head, like Atlas Shrugged! Exclamation. Or Tom Jones! Exclamation. Doesn't work in all that many applications. In a world different from books, I am a major lover of music. Most genres. I particularly love punk and new wave and alternative. And a favorite group of mine, Susie and the Banshees, had a song on their album A Kiss in the Dream House called Melt. But it was Melt with the exclamation point. And I thought that worked wonderfully there too, within the context of the song and the lyrics and what Susie is singing. Melt without the exclamation point just wouldn't have been the same. I mean, it worked there. So each time you're tempted to put down an exclamation point somewhere, ask yourself, have I used it in a way that conveys the message I want to convey? Have I made sure not to overuse it in this particular piece of writing? And act accordingly. I get these emails, very often marketing emails. They're not written by one individual to me as an individual. They're written by a marketing department trying to sell me something. And they are exclamation point happy, where I read them and I know you're really excited about the fact that your co-op now sells organic oranges, or you're really excited about the upgrade to your email system, which is almost never an upgrade. It's almost always a downgrade. So in those cases, I think the exclamation points are actually deceptive because they're trying to get me to be excited about something that I know just below the surface of my consciousness is going to be worse, not better. Okay, so let's move on to another piece of, I don't know if you'd call this punctuation so much as formatting, and that is italics. Again, this isn't showing up very well, I apologize. So, everybody knows more or less the rules for what you have to italicize. Book titles, album titles, the names of ships, excuse me. But you can also use them for emphasis. And I think the question, which is quite controversial, is how much italics is too much? One school of thought says that emphasis, the emphasis that is implied by the use of italics, should come across in the writing, in the words, in the character's behavior or mannerisms as he or she is speaking those words. Or if the author is writing prose, there are other ways to emphasize important elements and not use italics. I'm totally in favor of italics when you're writing dialogue, because if you're looking to transcribe the patterns of the way people speak, some people do speak in italics, and it can be very effective and fun to listen to. A person who speaks with italics in his or her voice is often really a pleasure to talk with or to listen to. The question becomes the larger use of italics within a book. So I will say that I read a book. It was a thriller. I think you'd call it a thriller, but it was a very cerebral thriller. And it was sort of Thomas Pynchon-esque in that from the first page, you just didn't know what was going on, right? All of these bizarre things are being thrown at you. And I, for one, love that. I love having the rug pulled out from under me or not knowing what the hell I'm reading, because I trust that the writer will show me, will explain at some point, probably towards the end or in ways that are parceled out throughout the book. And so this is one of my favorite novels of the last couple of years, and I would love to mention its name because I'd really like to recommend it to you. But I'm about to say something critical of it, so that's why I'm not going to mention the name of it. But the author completely overused italics, entire sentences, paragraphs, in ways that didn't seem appropriate within the paragraph, the chapter, or the scene, whatever you want to call it. And I closed that book and I thought, God, that book was fabulous. But what's up with all of the italics? And then I went to Goodreads and Amazon, as I always do. And what do I see in the reviews from, everyday readers? Why did author X use italics so much? It was distracting. It took away from her writing. It took away from my experience of reading. The use of it seemed so indiscriminate that readers were wondering what she was doing. It was part of her style, but it was not an effective part of her style. I wonder if her editor said, I just said it was her, but that's okay. I'm not going to figure this out from her gender, her sex. Said, you might want to lighten up on the italics a little bit. And did this author then say, no, that is what I want to do? Either way, I would still recommend the book, and I still loved it. But the italics were too much. Now, on the other side of that coin, I have to tell you about a writer whose use of italics I love. And she uses italics a lot. I mean, a lot, in a lot of different ways. I can't even tell you how much she uses italics because she uses italics a lot. And that is Joyce Carol Oates, who is, I think, one of our finest writers now. As a novelist, she has limitless imagination. She is always trying new things. She's not afraid to tackle controversial subjects. The writing I just find gorgeous. I can't put her books down. Once I've started one, I can't put it down. There's something, it's like she casts a spell on me. And I read every word. I don't ever skim. I just want to savor and enjoy every one of her words. But she does love her italics, and she uses them very well. So I just want to show you one book of hers. This is A Bloodsmore Romance. And I don't think showing you pages on video, they're too tiny to read. But there's italics on every page of this book, and not just a little bit, but a lot of it. And within the context of this narrative and what she's doing, it just works. It just works. I should mention, A Bloodsmore Romance is part of, I think we call it her Gothic cycle. There's 5 books, all of which are written in sort of a very ornate, almost 18th century Gothic, slightly parodying and slightly but I would say slightly, I would say also with great affection towards the 18th century novels. So they start with Belle Fleur, and then there's A Blood's More Romance, Mysteries of Winterthorn, My Heart Laid Bare, and then the most recent one was The Accursed. They're all just incredible works. I recommend Belle Fleur highly. It's one of my favorite novels. It's an amazing feat of the imagination. And the most recent, which we had to wait a long time for, I think for some strange reason, it took long to get published. It had been known sort of among those of us who love these Gothic books. I think the original title was called The Crosswicks Horror, and it was finally published as The Accursed. And it is, I don't have the words to describe how impressive it is. So, Joyce Carol has a lot of fans and a lot of detractors. I am a fan, and the criticisms of her as being too prolific, one has to wonder if there's any sexism going on in there, because we don't hear that about, or didn't hear that about Dickens' Trollope. We don't hear it about James Patterson, although he's not really in the same category. So enough of my gushing, cavelling about Joyce Carol Oates, but she's a great case study in how to use italics effectively. All right, moving on to punctuation pieces, number 4. I want to talk about, this one shows up, good. Parentheses and the em dash. Okay, the em dash is a long dash. Right? So a lot of you know there's a difference between a hyphen, an en dash, which is a short dash, and an em dash, which is a long dash. So the thing that these two pieces of punctuation have in common is they take you out of the sentence that you're reading. They add something, in the case of parentheses, or put something, sort of a side note. And in the case of em dashes, which can be used in pairs, or there can be just one of them if it comes before a phrase that ends a sentence, they create this effect of taking you out of the main idea, the main point the author is making in that sentence. And I'm not sure that's always the best thing to do. I find that when I edit, I am very often eliminating parentheses and eliminating em dashes. Because I'm pretty sure that when people see something in parentheses, they're tempted to just blip right over it. They assume it isn't important, so they don't have to read it. I think something similar happens with em dashes. If you're reading a piece of writing and something interrupts it, it's a bit like being interrupted in conversation. Nobody likes to be interrupted. So with em dashes, you've got this sort of weird effect going on where the author is interrupting himself or herself, which I think leads to some cognitive dissonance with the readers. And so very often, if something's in parentheses, I will suggest to the author, let's just kill it. Let's just get rid of it. Because if it's not important enough to be in the sentence, we don't need it. Or if it is important enough, it shouldn't be in parentheses. It should stand on its own, maybe in its own sentence. And if you're making a point within em dashes, do you want to annoy people with something that you find important? Or do you want that idea to have its own structure that stands on its own because it's worthy of being read, it's worthy of writing, it's worthy of saying. So this is not to say that parentheses and em dashes are the devil's punctuation, that they should never be used. But again, I would suggest using them sparingly and making sure that they do what you want them to do, and that they're not an invitation to skip over something that you want to say, or something that you want to be heard. All right, let's move on to number 5. And this is going to be the last one for this video because I don't want the video to go on for 2 hours. Let's talk about quotation marks. So we all know in the United States we use double quotation marks. In the UK and Australia, writers will use single quotation marks. It's just a cultural difference in typesetting and the way books are done. So you all know quotation marks are used for dialogue. Not everybody does. I've read plenty of books that will use an em dash to indicate conversation or dialogue. Charlie Houston, who's sort of an edgy mystery thriller writer, does that, and I think it works there well. I enjoy his books. But for the rest of us, quotation marks for dialogue are the way to go. The use I want to talk about here is what we would call air quotes or scare quotes. In other words, along the lines of, oh boy, that rainstorm was really convenient for getting to work. Or that dress she was wearing was really expressive of her desire to be perceived as chic and avant-garde, period. I love using and seeing air quotes used in conversation. They're fun. They are a fun thing. And I remember my own father never could sync up his speech with his air quotes. So he would say the word or phrase that he wanted to use in air quotes, then he'd stop, and then he'd do this, and he'd continue. And we would say, Dad, you really haven't gotten the air quote thing down. Could you work on that? But he never did. So that was part of his charm. But let's think about the use of air quotes in writing. Okay, so if you are writing a piece of prose and you want to convey an ironic or sarcastic use of a term, by the way, irony good, sarcasm bad. Nobody likes sarcasm. It's not funny. It's painful often to read or hear or listen to. In my many eavesdroppings on people's conversations, I hear sarcasm being substituted for humor or wit, and it's not funny. It's not. But irony is highly, highly funny, and in the right hands is one of the most fun things you can read, because our world is filled with irony every minute of the day, from the moment we wake up to the minute we go to bed. And as I often say, isn't it ironic that Alanis Morissette didn't know the meaning of the word ironic? Because the title of that song should have been Bad Luck, not ironic. Music lovers will know what I'm talking about. If not, check it out on YouTube and see what you think. So I believe that using air quotes in prose is not good writing. It doesn't, it conveys a sense to the reader that the writer has been too lazy to find a way to express his or her ironic usage of a particular term. And so I don't recommend them in a piece of prose. I also don't recommend them in terms of definitions. So if, let's say you're writing an economics book and you want to define the term consumer surplus. So you could write consumer surplus is the amount of satisfaction the consumer gets that is the difference between the price that he is willing to pay and the price that he actually pays. The problem is that when you use quotation marks for a term you're going to define, they could be read as air quotes or scare quotes or irony or sarcasm. So you don't want a definition that you're writing, to be serious, to convey information, to have the reader think that there's some sort of jocular thing going on because you've put it in quotes. So that's a place where I think italics is the way to go. So you say consumer surplus means, you can put consumer surplus in italics, and that signals the reader this is a term that's being defined. It's maybe a definition that I should learn and remember because it'll be used elsewhere in this book. We'll come back to this concept. It's something that I need to be familiar with in order to proceed through the remaining book, or the remainder of the book. So those are my feelings on quotation marks. And who would think that one could make a 35-minute video about 5 pieces of punctuation? But like all grammar geeks out there, I love punctuation. I was driving along in a car a few years ago, and the passenger said to me, "Oh, punctuation is ridiculous. Let's just get rid of all of it." And I said, "Get out and walk home." I was only partially kidding. I was truly kidding. But I'll close by quoting the Electric Company. Right? Do you all remember that great, kids show growing up? They had segments on punctuation, and I'm not going to attempt to sing the jingle because my singing voice will send you running to the hills. They said, punctuation, they are the little marks that use their influence to help a sentence make more sense. And that's exactly what they do. But more than just making literal sense, they also send signals to the reader about all kinds of things. And so I just want to advocate really looking at your punctuation and seeing if it fits your tone, the tone that you want to have, your theme, your genre, what you're trying to accomplish. By the same token, make sure that your punctuation doesn't deconstruct or fly in the face of what you're trying to do. You don't want to send mixed signals to your reader. You want to be straightforward about that. Okay, so next time on Editorial Dude, those 5 more pieces of punctuation that we all know and love or don't love, depending on who we are and what we're thinking at any particular moment. Okay, Bye everyone, thanks for listening, and more punctuation in the next video. Don't hold your breath.